Hello, everybody. This is Tim Saka from CNY RISE Center. We are here for another special event tonight. Our topic is nonviolence and the Hizmet movement. And we have a special guest tonight, our good friend, Dr. Tony Bartlett. Hello, doctor. How are you?
Hello, Timur. It's good to be here. I'm well, thank you.
Can I call you Tony, or do you prefer Dr. Bartlett?
Call me Tony. You always call me Tony.
Yes, I do. Yes, thank you. I would like to talk about our topic tonight, that we specifically wanted to focus on the topic of nonviolence for this conversation. We are now starting the series called Rise Talks, and we will be doing a series of talks in the future. And for the first talk we are going to be doing right now, we would like to focus on nonviolence, especially what's happening nowadays around the world, that we are kind of getting closer and closer to the edges of constantly we are hearing the stories of violence around the world. One day we are hearing a mosque has been attacked, another day a church has been attacked, and there is another attack in a concert, and the countries are now getting more and more closer to the violence. And we believe that nowadays we need to spend more time discussing how we can build nonviolence. And we will also talk about the Hizmet movement, what is their position in this whole conversation of the nonviolence. I want to share about my story, that when I heard about the Hizmet movement when I was in middle school in Turkey, I was interested in it. I was trying to read their books and understand what was happening. That was the time Turkey was just coming out of the civil war in 1970s and 80s. The rightists and the leftists were fighting and killing each other on the streets. So the country was heavily divided, and it was almost like a bravery to be out on the street and fight and own gun and do violence to protect your values and your country. During that time, Honorable Fethullah Gulen was constantly telling his people, do not go out to the street and do not get involved with the violence. Do not face any kind of a violence action against other civilians or other, police or the army. He was telling everybody to be nonviolent. And my relatives, my friends, they were always kind of heckling me and making fun of me, saying that you guys are a bunch of weak people. You don't do anything. You don't go out to the street to defend anything out there. You just stay home and read books and things like that. What is your worth for this country? And it was always kind of tough to be able to argue or understand something with them from the non-violence perspective. But now it's been decades later. Turkey has been through a lot. Turkey has been seeing many turmoil throughout the decades. The world has been seeing a lot of turmoil. But somehow this message of non-violence reached out to millions of people. A lot of people kind of picked up on it, and they went around the world to pass this message. So we want to talk about this whole perspective of why this message of nonviolence means something for the world. So again, I would like to welcome our guest speaker tonight. Dr. Tony Bartlett was born in England, and he was ordained for priesthood in 1973. Then he received his PhD in the Department of Religion from Syracuse University. He and his wife, Linda Bartlett, are leading the Bethany Center for Nonviolence Theology and Spirituality in Syracuse area. And he is a globally accepted authority on the topic of nonviolence, and he wrote multiple books. So we are so happy to have him tonight with us. So welcome, Tony, and please tell about yourself.
Hi, well, thank you, Timur. I'm very honored to be here on this first broadcast of from the RISE Center, the RISE Center Talks. And you and I have been friends now for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years. I'll have to calculate more carefully, but we've quite a while we've been friends. And I've always been very affected and influenced by you as a Muslim, a Turkish Muslim man, for whom nonviolence and forgiveness, compassion is a central component of your spirituality, at least from what I can see. So, and you've been consistent in that way. And I've discovered over the years that you've learned this through being a follower or a student of Fethullah Gulen and his teaching of Islam in Turkey, but also across the world. So I've become very impressed with Gulen progressively, and I actually had the opportunity to meet him, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit. But I have this joining with you and joining with the Hizmet people that I've met through you has become a part of my own life. I'm a Christian and a Christian theologian, but I have been influenced and educated quite a lot by Timur and by the Hizmet people that I have encountered, first of all through the Turkish Cultural Center and then through the RISE Center. So I came to the United States in 1993, over 20 years ago, and I came as a younger man. I came to do a PhD in the Department of Religion here at Syracuse University, and I graduated. I got my PhD in 1999, and I did a thesis on the impact of violence in Christian theology, because I discovered the thought of a particular writer and author back in the 80s, really, in the mid 80s, by the name of René Girard, and he has a very particular and persuasive and powerful account of the nature of violence, and I think we will talk about that a little as we get along. But it was because of him that I eventually came to the United States to study and then to do my PhD, and then eventually to publish in that area. My family came with me. I had 1 year on my own, a very lonely year studying, but it helped me. All I could do was read. There was nothing else to do. I just read, and it was very good for my study. But my family followed in 1994, and I had 2 young children, but they grew up here, and and then we had a 3rd child, Liam. He became, he was born here, and all of us became American citizens in the year, I think 2010, I think it was. And then, and my wife works here now. She is a nurse practitioner and is currently very involved in the work of combating the coronavirus here in New York, where it's probably the most, it's the most infectious of anywhere in the world. So she's working very hard currently. So that is my situation. Before I came to the United States, from about 10 years, I was a priest in the Roman Catholic Church. I left the official priesthood in 1984, and I did so because it'd be a long story to tell, but essentially I was trying to find a way of serving and finding God more in the midst of the world and in the midst of many kind of religious situations and encounters, rather than in a particular church, one church situation. And that has been my experience. I have greatly enlarged my horizon of experience of God in the world and of God's action in the world, especially I think in terms of the Islamic faith, though other faiths as well. So I find myself first of all as a Christian theologian, but a Christian theologian working within the world as it is today, and the many challenges and threats, as you mentioned when we began, especially from the possibilities of violence in the world. So I think being a theologian and working in theology is acutely important. It may seem distant from people's most immediate concerns, but I think it affects them very deeply, and ultimately everybody has some kind of theological viewpoint, and therefore to influence theology is a very important thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And you mentioned that when you came to United States, you were alone for a year, and then your family joined you. Before I continue, I also want to convey our gratitude for Linda, that she's right now in the front line battling with the coronavirus in a testing center in the upstate hospital. So we are so grateful for everything she does for the safety of the community. And we know that she started that profession because of her faith, that she wants to be there with the most vulnerable people and help them because she was inspired by Jesus doing that. So we are grateful for everything she does over there. So with she and you started this like a Bible study Christian group, and you also called it Bethany House. So please tell me about this Bethany House, and you specifically picked the non-violent theology and spirituality for the focus of this center. So please tell me about the Bethany House.
Well, Timur, we have been meeting as a small study community and Bible study community for over 20 years. And I was just in parenthesis, I'm very impressed that one of the first things that Fethullah Gulen did was to start study circles. What is the name in Turkish for that, for the study circle? Sorbet or sorbet? Or
Sohbet, yes, sohbet.
yes, sohbet, yes. And that was the primary ground from which this movement, Hizmet movement, arose. They had study circles, and he supported them, and lots of young people joined them. So we were doing the same thing in terms of Christianity and in terms of the Christian religion since basically, I think 1999. And we've met in many different places across the city. And then 4 years ago, in 2000, well, 5 years ago now, 2015, we moved to our present location on the south side of the city, and we established our own center, and it's called, and we've actually built a new building here, which has a meeting room attached to it. So we have a meeting room attached to our house. It's kind of like the lighthouse movement that you also had in the Hizmet experience. But anyhow, we meet here, we have met here, and the purpose of our study is to discover the meaning of the gospel as the communication of nonviolence and forgiveness in the world. For many, many centuries in the Christian religion, and I think in many other religious settings as well, the main focus has been, what must I do to get to heaven? And I think that's still probably the case for a lot of people, because obviously the concept of heaven and going there or not going there is has become kind of central to religious thought. But equally important, if not more important, I believe, as you study the Gospels and you study the Bible and the Christian Bible, we discover, I think, that God intends to change the character of human existence from one of violence and unremitting violence. We've always been at war as a human species. We've always been killing each other since the very beginning as humans. I think we can see that. And it's God's intention to bring God's creation to the fullness of life, to what God intends, by actually changing our basic human character from violence and revenge, anger, rivalry, and murder, to forgiveness, peace, and nonviolence. And we've always tried to teach the scripture in that sense. That's the core principle, and we've seen how that works out in the whole progression of the Bible, and especially in the death, the nonviolent death of Jesus, the non-retaliatory death of Jesus, whereby he gave us an example of how to be. It's hard. It's very hard for anybody not to retaliate if you're attacked. It's the natural way, I'd say, way to be human is to retaliate if you're attacked in any way, verbally or physically. But Jesus showed us another way, I do believe, and it's in order that creation might reach its intended goal. It's not so that I would be a good person, a non-violent person. It's in order that we might bring life to the whole of creation and to all things that are looking for the life that non-violence will produce.
Thank you. So you mentioned about the nature of non-violence, nature of violence within the humanity. I want to start some kind of a conversation from the beginning of the Quran. When you open the Quran and go to the first page, after a couple verses, it comes to the beginning of the story that God just creates the the human being, Adam, as a prototype of a human being, and he let the angels almost like investigate it and check it out. So when the angels check this new species that God has created, they were immediately recognized that there's a huge violent tendencies in this new species. And it was interesting. Beyond any other feature, that is what angels brought up. Angels said that uh, there's a new species here, God, and you are all knowing, but they're gonna kill each other. They're gonna be having violence throughout the whole centuries. That like why? Like what is the purpose of this? And God told them, I know something that you don't. That God told them in the beginning of the Quran. So it was interesting that we start the whole story of human creation from the perspective of violence, and this also goes into the Adam, that from his two sons, immediately the first thing, as a big story that we know, one brother kills the other one, and unfortunately it continues throughout the whole generation. But there has been a break of this cycle along the way. Like for example, when Prophet Joseph was thrown to the well by his brothers, and then anything against them, when everything was done, he came to his brothers and he forgave them. He told them that today there is no ill intention for you. I'm gonna take care of you here. He gave them even presents. And Jesus has done that, and Prophet Muhammad has done that. That they tortured him and killed many Muslims, and he came back to Mecca and he said, "I'm going to tell you exactly what Prophet Joseph told to his brothers. Today there is no ill intention for you. You can go in peace." So looking at this perspective of when you look at the human nature, the first thing that angels recognized was the violence, and the God's intention was to be able to break that cycle. What is your perspective on this after you study all the scriptures and everything? Where are we in this adventure?
Well, it's very interesting that the Quran should start in that way, because that's the same way the Hebrew Bible starts. The Hebrew and Christian Bible starts that way, because it starts with the story that you mentioned, and those stories are very important. The story of Cain and Abel, and of Joseph, and of Jesus. Those stories are very important in terms of revealing that violence. And the Quran starts with saying, well, there's an issue here. There's a question, there's a problem, and the angels see it. And what the angels saw, I would say, I mean, like interpreting, but I would say what the angels saw was not simply a superficial fault, a tendency like a child might have some bad behavior that eventually grows out of. What the angels saw was a structural fault, and that's very important when we understand, if we're thinking about violence. Violence is not primarily and not fundamentally a moral issue, and it's not fundamentally a religious issue. It's a structural issue, and that's really part of the study that I've always been involved in. And the way to describe that structural character of violence is in terms of anthropology. It's a theory of anthropology. It's a theory of how we are human. And the Bible, as you point out, very quickly moves to an episode of violence with Cain killing his brother Abel. Now, why did Cain kill his brother Abel? It was because, according to the story, Abel's sacrifice was more pleasing to God than Cain's was. Now, the strange thing is that Cain was simply obeying what God had given him, is because he made Cain and Abel, if they were sons of their father Adam, they were tillers of the soil, and they took the produce of the soil. But Abel was somehow or other preferred because he used a lamb of his flock, an animal from his flock, to sacrifice. So immediately we get sacrifice, blood sacrifice, introduced in the discourse of the scripture, and it's not explained. It just arises. So that's a clue that sacrifice itself is an issue somehow or other. And the writer kind of knew that it was an issue and was not able fully to explain it, but basically showed that what Cain was angry about was somehow or other that Abel was somehow closer to God than he was. So ultimately, when we are in rivalry with each other, when we struggle with each other, there's something always very precious that the other one wants that I want. And that precious thing makes them somehow in our minds, in our kind of primitive minds, makes them closer to God, or makes them more godlike. So it's almost as if that everything is, when human beings enter into competition or struggle with each other, it's always over being somehow more godlike or more divine than the other. So that's why human beings, that's a way of describing why human beings are so intense in their violence. Like if an animal struggles with another animal, a non-human animal struggles with another animal, it's really over food or mates or territory, and it's over very quickly. But with us, it becomes absolute, it becomes transcendent, it becomes religious, and we fight terribly and without mercy, because the objects of our desire and the reason for our fighting and our violence are so absolute in our. So this is a structural issue, and as we go through this, you understand, or as I learned from this particular individual, this author that I came to the United States to study further. His name is René Girard, and I came across him in the 80s, and I came here to pursue my studies in that area. What Girard explains to us is that human beings are mimetic creatures, they're imitative creatures. And actually, Gulen said something along the same lines. He said a human being is a mirror of another human being. He said actually a Muslim is, I think maybe Muhammad said it, a Muslim is meant to be a mirror of another Muslim. And and Gulen expanded it, and he said a human being is a mirror of another. Now that can be either good, if I'm imitating something good, or it can be bad if I imitate somebody for what they desire and what they want, and I'm not even conscious of it. So if you have something, and I imitate your desire for something, it can be something you wish to consume. It could be even a beverage, a drink, or food. It could be a partner. It could be a way. It could be clothes. It could be territory. And you desire it, and I desire it because you desire it. I imitate your desire. Then the more you desire it, the more I'm going to desire it. The more I desire it, the more you're going to desire it. And very quickly, we're going to come to blows over it. Because we are so close up to each other, we imitate each other pre-reflectively. We imitate each other before we even know we're imitating. And so if we don't have a law or culture to restrain us, we will very quickly come to blows. And that's Girard's theory, that at a very early level, when we were first emerging as human beings, before there was law and culture, our very first parents, our first brothers and sisters as human beings, entered into violent struggles with each other. And the way they resolved it, so I'm actually anticipating a bit the solution here, the way they resolved it was by picking on one individual who is the scapegoat. And that way they resolved it. But I will leave it there for the time being, because otherwise we'll get further on down the road from where we should be. But we must remember that those stages, that we imitate, we enter into struggle and violence, and then we resolve it. Or the traditional way of resolving it very often is by blaming one individual, by picking on one individual and discharging all our violence on that particular individual or group.
I really appreciate about you how well you summarize the whole progress of it, how it starts, how it ends. That I see a lot of like the notion of jealousy in there. That you immediately wants to have what somebody else have, you want to imitate them, and then he immediately goes to violence. It reminds me of that when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to Mecca. Actually, a lot of people in the local Mecca people, they knew he was a prophet, but they were jealous and angry that God didn't pick them as the prophet.
That's
And
right. It becomes divine. It becomes transcendent. Yeah.
and they became the sworn enemy, that they did everything, torture, killing, and war against him because they wanted to have that. And I even heard that some Jewish tribes in that Mecca, Medina area, they heard there was going to be a prophet coming to that land, but they were expecting from their own grandchildren. And when it didn't happen from their grandchildren, they were also not happy with it also. It was just kind of this cycle all the time about jealousy and not to be able to reach there. So we have been talking in the beginning about the Hizmet movement.
And just that is the explanation for the Crusades. You know, we were both the Christians and Muslims were struggling over who has God on their side.
Yes, God is with us. That was always the big argument. I heard even France and England were fighting each other, and they were both trying to argue whose side God is on in that whole battle there. So I would like to now bring the perspective to the Hizmet movement for our conversation. And we have a quick little video. And this kind of summarizes what Hizmet movement is. We might have some viewers tonight who maybe haven't heard of the Hizmet movement and what does it do, what kind of a service they do for the rest of the society. So we'd like to share now a quick couple minutes of a video, and then we'll continue further about our conversation about the Hizmet movement also.
Fethullah Gulen was born in the east part of Turkey. He inspired fellow citizens in mobilizing around the cause of providing access to quality education, and by inspiring the establishment of scholarships, free tutoring centers, college prep courses, schools, and student hostels for all, regardless of social economic status, ethnic, or religious background.
The Hizmet movement that Mr. Gulen has inspired is phenomenal. It's a way of saying to not just to Muslims, but to non-Muslims especially, here's who we are, here's what we need to do.
Hizmet participants have expanded education opportunities around the world, from Central Asia to South Africa, from Australia to the Balkans and Americas.
What Fethullah Gulen and the movement have done is to offer a model for Muslims around the entire planet of how to be thoroughly world citizens, thoroughly citizens of the 21st century, and at the same time deeply Muslim. It's hard to overestimate how important that task is.
Hizmet also rejuvenated the tradition of interfaith dialogue and strongly advocates pro-democracy, equal opportunity, pro-science, non-violent stances. One of the core tenets of his teachings is the celebration of religious, cultural, social, and political diversity.
We live in a world that is full of fear, and a lot of fear in the West is fear of Muslims. The Hizmet movement has been tremendously effective, in my opinion, in showing the true face of Islam, that it's a religious tradition that in many ways is no different than Judaism or Christianity.
Humanitarian aid is an important component of the Hizmet movement, which is represented by the Embrace Relief in the US, that organizes the aid efforts through opening water wells and performing cataract surgeries in Africa, and also reaching out to the disaster-stricken zones around the world. One of the core ideals of Hizmet is not just an emphatic acceptance of religious, cultural, social, and political diversity, but actual celebration of this diversity. Because Hizmet participants consider this diversity as divine will.
This is the attempt to celebrate all of humanity, and I think that's why Hizmet is different from other religious groups.
Okay. I hope that was a little bit helpful to give perspective about the Hizmet movement. Again, when I was growing up as a young middle school, high school student, I was just hearing this different perspective coming from a different scholar talking about the diversity, interfaith dialogue, and how to reach the others and how to serve the others. and you are coming from a whole different background from England. What was your experience knowing about the Hizmet, and what is different about it? What kind of makes Hizmet movement stand alone by itself with that kind of a perspective? Please share your experience about the Hizmet movement.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I learned first about Hizmet from you and other members of the Turkish Cultural Center, and who were not necessarily all Turkish either. Some were from Azerbaijan, and they were Kurdish. There were other Islamic people who have been persuaded by Gulen's approach. As I got to know your group and your movement better, I understood that, first of all, Hizmet means service, so that's a possible translation of it. But there's another translation I came across. I think it can mean grace or favor or kindness, and that makes it, I think, for me, a little bit more understandable. It makes its power understandable, because service, yes, to do good to another is important. It's part of the Abrahamic religions to serve those in need. But what is it that mobilizes? What is it in the Hizmet movement that actually engages these people like yourself, these people in Turkey, as I understand it, from the 70s and the 80s, beginning in those decades, and accumulating over the years, up to 3, 4, 5 million people, members in Turkey and across the world. So there has to be something very powerful. It's not just saying, well, you need to go and help people. There has to be something that mobilizes, that inspires the deep core of individuals to do that. And to explain all that would, it would take a long time. It would take a history lesson, because you really have to understand Turkey a little bit. And I've started to try to think about that more. But Turkey was forced, just to give a little synopsis, which anybody who's Turkish here knows this, but Turkey was forcibly secularized after the First World War. The shock of the defeat of the First World War and the loss, as I understand it, of the Ottoman Empire was very great. And as a reaction, there was a movement in Turkey named after its founder, Atatürk, Kemal Atatürk, that in some ways forbade Islam, that actually pushed Islam into a corner in Turkey and said, well, you can practice your beliefs privately or in a separatist way, but you will not affect society anymore. So there was a great sense that who was to blame? Who was to blame for this defeat? As we were saying, we all need the scapegoat. And who was to blame for this? Well, it was Islam. Now, of course, there's many threads in all of this, and we haven't got to, and religion plays a big part in all cultures and societies, and there's many aspects to it. But Turkey went through that whole experience, and then little by little, in the 70s and 80s, things began to loosen up a little bit in Turkey. And Gulen, as they say, cometh the hour, cometh the man. Gulen arrived at the right time, and his particular mix of deep devotion. This is what I understand about Gulen, and we might talk about that a little bit more. But he had deep devotion to the Islamic tradition, going back to the authorities and the sages, the wise people of that tradition, all the way back to Muhammad and his original followers. He had an enormous kind of, you would say, it was actually very conservative devotion to these figures and traditionalism. But at the same time, so that's one aspect. And at the same time, the other aspect is that Gulen had an enormous sensitivity to the suffering of people, to people suffering, and to the needs of people, the religious needs of people. And he's not a doctrinaire man. He's not a fanatic, and he's not a someone who's going to hit you with Islamic doctrine. What he's going to do is try to communicate to you basically his experience of God and the way that mobilizes him and mobilize others to be with and for other people. So my feeling is that Hizmet is actually ultimately the non-violence of God. I mean, that's my feeling of what Hizmet means. It means that God is really on your side. It's on everybody's side. It's on the side of humanity. Gulen quotes, if I get this right, but quotes a poem or a writing by Rumi, where he says that the ideal is to have one foot inside Islam and the other foot inside the rest of humanity.
72 tribes, 72 people around the world, yes.
That's right. So he says, to be a good Muslim, you have to have one foot inside of Islam and the other foot inside the rest of humanity. And I think that is exactly what Gulen is. You know, he has one foot inside of traditional Islam, and on the other hand, he has a foot inside of human needs and of human concerns in Turkey, but across the world. He is a man of great compassion. And compassion, he also says that compassion is very close to God. Compassion is the source of creation. And of course, in the Quran, every chapter, I believe, begins with, in the name of Allah, the compassionate and merciful one, you know, which is beautiful.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, yes.
There you go. Which is the most beautiful statement about God. Every chapter has that. So there's something immensely compassionate about the Islamic tradition, and especially the Turkish Rumi Sufi kind of cultural tradition. And Gulen understood that, and he began to express it, and he began to teach people, young people especially, in this way of understanding Islamic religion. And I think what people don't understand, and I kind of like this is the main point that I get from learning about the Gulen movement and Hizmet, is that what people don't understand, they think that Islam, in the way he's presenting it, intends to take over the world. That's I mean, it's the age-old problem that we were talking about. You've got God on your side, so you want to be God, you know, or we've got God on our side, so you think we want to be God, and we probably do, you know. Everybody wants to have that divine status. But actually what he's actually proposing, I think, is that at the heart of this religious experience that he experiences goes back to Muhammad, and praise be upon him, as you say, that it goes back to him and his companions. It's a movement of compassion for humanity, which actually means that I want human beings to do well, to survive, not to die. I don't want to kill you. I want you to live, and I want you to grow, because that is the divine side of religion. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, other religions in the world, that is the divine side. The human side is to want to have God on your side, to want to triumph because you have God, because you're like Abel or Cain and you have God in your power, shall we say. That's the human way of being religious. The divine way of being religious is to have compassion and to learn compassion. So I think that the reason why Hizmet succeeded was because it's a movement of grace and of compassion in the hearts of many millions of people. And they have, you know, that doesn't make them perfect. It doesn't make anybody perfect. We all have our faults. But it mobilizes them. It puts something in their hearts and their minds for the sake of others. And they want to do it. They want to do something. They are positively motivated to assist and to come to the aid of people. And I see that in the CNY RISE Center, the Turkish Cultural Center before, but in the RISE Center now, that community wants to be at the service of the city of Syracuse, and it is. I mean, and so it's a movement of grace, of compassion, of service that comes from the heart of the divine, as discovered and communicated by this man, Fethullah Gulen. And As I say, it could have been any, as you were telling that story, the Jews want it to be a Jewish person, the Christians want it to be a Christian person, and of course it could be anybody. But when you understand that compassion is the heart of the divine, if I see Fethullah Gulen or I see the Hizmet people in the RISE Center doing this work, they're doing the work of God. Doesn't matter what they are showing me the revealed God of the Abrahamic tradition, and that has been my experience.
And from that talking point about service and taking care of others, I always remember that when I was growing up, there was a couple different ideas that Gulen gave me inspiration. One was that always choose your person next to yourself, like give them the priority, let them have it. Don't try to fight for them. Don't try to have a like a competition, like you mentioned it. He said, even if you are at the gate of the heaven and you are about to open the door and go enter the heaven, he said, ask your friend to go first. You go behind them. Do not try to run to the yourself to fight or something, he said. And then he said, you should always have a seat in your heart for everybody. When people come into your heart, they should not be standing up. They should be finding a seat in your heart to be there with you. But I want to bring another perspective here that recently things have changed a lot in Turkey. That you talked about the scapegoating and you talked about different ways that the movement that I knew for decades, when nonviolence, peaceful, and taking care of others, for one night the story has changed. That there was a coup attempt in Turkey, and within a couple hours, the president of the country said that this is done by the Gulen movement followers, and Gulen was the mastermind of it. He is the biggest terrorist in the world right now, so we are gonna go start after him right away. And that night, the whole thing has changed. Millions of people in Turkey automatically became terrorists, and they became target of a purge from the government. And they had escaped the country, they were arrested and everything like that. And they were talking about more than 500,000 people in Turkey directly being purged, dismissed from their work, their wealth is taken away, 100,000 has been arrested, tortured in the prisons, and some of them died. And it's interesting that even though they have been claimed as terrorists, there has been a single violent incident while the police are chasing them. They are torturing them or anything like that. That how come a movement that is supposed to be the worst terrorist ever would not have a single reaction throughout that whole 3-4 years right now in this process? So I have a little video again to show kind of help people to see what we are talking about here, the process in Turkey, what happened with the coup, and afterwards. So let's go listen to that one, and then we'll talk a couple more minutes about that one also.
Can you imagine what it feels like to be silenced?
Bunları hayat hakkı tanımayacağız. Bu kanser virüsünü temizleyip atacağız.
My husband's name is Turgay Karaman. He has been kidnapped approximately 4 hours ago. He's a gentleman. Never hurt anyone.
The ruling Justice and Development Party, headed by President Erdogan, has demonstrated a growing intolerance of political opposition, public protest, and critical media.
Bunları öyle bir cezalandıracağız ki bırak idamı, gebersek de kurtulsak diye yalvaracak.
Hiçbir şey yapmadığı halde sapasağlam bir çocuğum benim cenazesini alıyor.
15 üniversitenin hayrını görün. Bu kadar sağlık için hayrını görün. İnternet okulun hayrını görün. Şu kanalın hayrını. Tepe tepe kullanın. Afiyet olsun. Hakkınızdır. Ganimettir ganimet. Ganimettir ganimet. Ganimetiniz hayırlı olsun. Hayır. Ganimetin hayrını görün.
Many lawyers fear the same tragic fate that befell their colleagues in this dark period, as the AKP government took entire control of the judiciary amid gross human rights violations. More than 150,000 public servants and private sector workers lost their jobs. Over 60,000 people were imprisoned pending trial. 4,200 members of the judiciary have been arbitrarily dismissed from public service. by emergency decrees without due process. Lawyers also faced pressure and crackdown that targeted thousands of people over claims of affiliation with the Hizmet movement. Since July 15, 2016, nearly 1,500 lawyers faced prosecution and criminal investigation over accusations of affiliation with the Hizmet movement on grounds of social media shares or the suspected affiliations of their clients.
So that was the quick little summary of what happened in Turkey, that in 2016, there was a coup attempt, and immediately the Gulen movement followers, Hizmet movement followers has become the scapegoat for this process. And then all of a sudden, hundreds and thousands of people's life has changed. It is so hard to kind of grasp it, because such hard to understand this peaceful movement all of a sudden has become this unending, unlimited hate by the government, also by the people, that they were hated so much, even if they have died, they did not bury them in the regular cemeteries. Some of them, they were put into the animal cemeteries. They also, in some cities, has built the cemeteries called the Traders Cemetery, and they have been built over there by the public shaming. And the members of the movement had to do everything they can to escape, and people are also being arrested and put into jail, and unfortunately they have been tortured and kidnapped in the process. In the video we have seen that there was one father, he was saying that they just took his son, which was just a teacher in one of the schools, and he had some kind of illnesses, and they tortured him, and unfortunately after the torture he died. And then like a year later, the government said, oh, that was a mistake. He was actually an innocent guy. We just did it by mistake. And right now, the glasses that he was wearing during torture is in a museum right now in Europe that they're now showing to the public. And in this process, 17,000 women went to the jail, and almost 800 babies ended up in the jail with their mother. And I haven't seen any kind of a purging and oppression in the history before. They are even going after the pregnant women, that if a woman is pregnant, a police is waiting at the delivery room in the hospital, and about 45 minutes later after the delivery, they just bring them the baby and the woman back to the prison again. Even in the history, we have seen a few examples of this. So I want you to talk about this scapegoating and the perspective of Renee Girard, that how come we can understand what's really happening in Turkey with this movement and with the government?
Well, I mean, I've actually never visited Turkey, and what I understand about it is really through you and through some reading that I have done. But it seems to me fairly evident that this is a very powerful scapegoating process that has been engineered by the government in Turkey at the moment. And the reason is that the Hizmet movement, as I understand it, created a kind of social revolution in Turkey. It's not a political revolution, it's certainly not a violent revolution. But as they say, Hizmet was able to mobilize very large numbers of young people, and I've even heard it said or seen it said that Hizmet in some ways created a middle class in Turkey. It created a new level of educated people who were engaged in social activities and in business activities, and they succeeded as a result. But they succeeded on the basis of education and of service to each other and service to others outside the movement. So it was a social transformation that Hizmet brought about. When the history comes to be written, I think that will have to be acknowledged, that this is equivalent, say, to any revolution in I think, the European countries that we know of. But as I say, it's not a violent revolution. It was a social revolution. It was the creation of a class of people who were at the service of the community and were actually equipped, were well educated, were skilled, were professional in their abilities. And I think the present government, as far as I could see, and I understand it, used a lot of those people. The Erdogan government and his party used those people to create a power base. A lot of those people were at the service of that movement that, to some degree, reintegrated Islam into society. But unlike Hizmet, that party movement and Erdogan were not interested in grace and in compassion, as I've tried to describe it, which is a religious and interpersonal communicative process. It's not politics is to do with power. And that party was interested in power. So at a certain point, there came a parting of the ways. And those who were interested in power had to get rid of those who are not interested in power, or let's say are more interested in service and in compassion. And so two things happened. One was that they began to purge them from positions of influence, and then to scapegoat them, because the two things go together. If you want to get rid of somebody, you also then blame them, so that you win twice. You know, you get rid of your opponent, and then you blame them for the problem. And so what I can see, this is a classic instance that what's happened to the Hizmet movement is a classic instance of social scapegoating, and that it has, and that the purported coup of 2016 was a completely fake event used to blame that movement and to swing the population against them. And so unfortunately, the Hizmet movement have become the scapegoats for a power political enterprise or project in Turkey at the moment. But the great news is, the good news is, this cannot last, because the revelation of the scapegoat, the revelation of the innocence of the scapegoat, goes hand in hand with our time, with our epoch in history. You cannot continue to make scapegoats people and make their supposed guilt stick. It cannot remain. You cannot control the discourse that way. Their innocence will be revealed, and when that happens, society will be massively impacted by the Hizmet movement. So this is a period of suffering, and it reminds me very much of the first 3 centuries. I don't want this to go on for 3 centuries, but certainly not, no one does. But it reminds me of the first 3 centuries of Christianity, when Christians were persecuted and scapegoated by the Roman Empire, and eventually they rose to power. But I hope that the Hizmet movement, I'm sure the Hizmet movement will be able to deal with that the moment of transformation when it comes, that they will be vindicated, they will be proven innocent of all that's been said against them, and that moment will be, as you've often told me, Timur, that they will, what Gulen says, when the time comes, when you are reinstated, you will not use that as a moment to punish your enemies. You will actually show that you have a different conception of what human life is. You will, once you get the power, you will not use that as a way of destroying your enemies. You will still be the same to them. I was very impacted by that, and I think the Gulen's long arc of his project, and the project of Hizmet, which is one of suffering now, no doubt about it, and injustice. That long arc will eventually prove victorious, and it will be a non-violent victory.
And you mentioned about some of the inspirations you have seen through the teachings of Mr. Fethullah Gulen. Recently, you also visited him. That we went together, and I was your translator actually over there. Tell me about your experience from the visit. That what was it actually something you expected, or was totally unexpected? Who did you
Well,
meet
it was
over there?
unexpected, that's for sure. I didn't expect it to happen. In fact, I was only told about it the day before I was due to go. I said, we had talked about it vaguely that we might do it. And then he said, well, we're going tomorrow. So I had to get in the car and I went down to Pennsylvania at the Poconos, and to his place, his estate there. And so there's three aspects of my experience there, which are memorable to me, which remain in my memory. One is that there was a lot of security. There were high wire fences, and there were security officials at the gate who looked like regular dark glasses men in black, you know, and scary guys, you know. And so you know immediately that there's some very powerful, dangerous politics going on here. I don't think Gulen is a political figure, like I've said, but politics swirl around him. They're around him, and I think the desire of the Turkish government is to bring him back to Turkey, to try him and to execute him. You know, so it's a dangerous situation for this man, and it's a dangerous situation that he lives in. So there's security there, and then you have to go through the security, and it's kind of like not everybody gets through. So you're channeled in. You feel privileged. You feel like, oh, this is amazing. I'm being allowed into this particular special place. And then I did the first place I went was the large prayer hall that you have. It's like a mosque, but it's not a mosque, just big prayer room. And there were about, say, 40, 50 people there, and they were praying. And then they asked Gulen questions, Fethullah Gulen questions. And I was impressed by the spirituality there. It was Islamic spirituality, but it was very powerful, and it was very real, very true and real. And I was impressed by that. And Fethullah Gulen came in, and so that's the third thing. Along with it, it's like, you know, you're going to meet this emperor. I mean, that would be the impression, or you would meet somebody who's a very powerful politician, but he's a humble man. So inside this kind of scary environment of security and then religion enters this very humble, simple man. And all of this is swirling around him. And he says to me, I want you to sit next to me, which was the very disconcerting thing. So he sits in the middle, everybody's paying him a lot of attention, and I'm sitting next to him. I don't even speak the language, so I'm feeling very insecure. But he was very gracious to me, and then ultimately he brought me into his private quarters along with a few of his other followers, and he sat me again on the central throne, the position of honor, and he gave me great honor. Now, what I understood from that was that here was a man of God, and that's basically what he is. He's a man of God, around whom, as I say, swirl all these politics. And he welcomed me as a child of God, and he gave me the respect and honor that any child of God would be given. And so it was an encounter for me with the Abrahamic tradition. It was almost like meeting Abraham in a way. It was like meeting a biblical figure, and it was a powerful experience. And that the simplicity of the man, whereby he wanted me to speak, he wanted me to say something. So essentially, I said the same thing 3 times. I had one thing to say, which was that I'm praying for you, that God is with you. Do not be upset. Do not be sad because of the oppression of your movement, but that God will make it. And I said it once, and then I had to say it again, and I said it a 3rd time. So I said it a biblical 3 times. And
well, I think it meant a lot for him to be able to get that. I think it meant a lot for him to hear that from you, because you can only stand those kind of oppression so many times, that to have that kind of support from somebody who has never met before, but still giving him that kind of encouragement, saying that you're on the right path, just keep doing what you're doing, and God will support you. I think it meant a lot for him to hear that.
That's what I said. That's what I felt. And I felt that he was receiving it like a child. There was nothing proud or arrogant in him. He was receiving these words. And here's a man who leads 3 million people, 3, 4, 5 million people. I don't know how. He would not consider himself to be the leader. He's just a servant of them, but he's inspired 3 million people. How many people have I inspired in my life? Maybe a dozen, let's say. So here's a man who has a dozen people I've inspired, helping a man who has inspired millions. And I felt humbled by it, but I felt it was my task. It was my job to do that. I had to do that. And he received it simply and humbly. And I think it, as you say, I think it touched him. So it's a mystery of the way of compassion in the world. It doesn't work the way of power and security, of guns and violence. It works in another way, and you don't fully understand it or fully follow it. You see little signs of it. You see signs of it, and you grasp those signs with your heart. But that's all, and I was very privileged to meet him, and it's one of the high points of my life. And I praise God, I praise Allah for bringing me to that point, and I hope that my prayer for Fethullah Gulen still stays with him.
God is always all hearing, that all the prayers and all the things that in our heart, I believe God will be bring it to the upfront and make it through. And I also want to highlight one thing we have experienced over there, that while we were having dinner, maybe you might remember there was one more Turkish guy across from us, and he was actually in Turkish jails, facing a bunch of oppression.
Yeah.
And he had to escape the country, even though he was just a teacher in a school over there. And we have experienced something, you mentioned to me that something about him was totally different. Can you also share that one?
Well, first of all, Fethullah Gulen insisted that we have very poor food. Because he said all his people in Turkey are in jail suffering poor food. So we had carrots and soup, and that was it basically. But because normally when I go to Turkish homes, they treat you, they give you fabulous food. So we were eating this kind of like simple prison food, and there was this guy opposite, and I asked him about himself, and he told me about how he escaped, and he had to cross that river. And he had to leave his family, he had to leave his wife and 3 children behind, because he would have died in prison. So here was a man. I had the immediate experience of a man who was the rawness of oppression, of the suffering of oppression was still on him. I could still feel it. He was it was part of him, and he was one of the persecuted for the sake of righteousness, I would say. As it says in the Gospels, one of the things Jesus says is, "Blessed are you." It's in what is called the Beatitudes, and it says, "Blessed are you if you are persecuted and abused, and people speak ill of you falsely on my account, because even so," he says, "rejoice and be glad." Rejoice, even though you're being persecuted, because even so they treated the prophets of old. So Jesus taught us to rejoice. It's a hard thing to do, to rejoice in the middle of persecution and suffering, because it means to say that the world, if the world has to persecute you, then the world is weak. You see what I mean?
Yes.
If they have to do that to win, they can't persuade you, they can't talk to you, they can't allow you your space to breathe, they have to crush you. As they said in that video, we will destroy their lives. If the world has to do that, it means that it's weak. It may not seem weak because it has all the weapons on its side, but ultimately what is stronger is the power of relationship with the divine, with the compassionate divine, with the God of human transformation of the Bible and the Abrahamic tradition. So that man was very impressive to me, and he taught me that. He taught me the beatitude of persecution.
And you told me that you haven't seen any hate in his heart, that even though he went through this whole process, he was still able to not to hold that grudge and the violence and hatred against his heart.
That was why he had the beatitude, because there was no hate in him. That's right. He was very calm and very gentle in his approach.
Now I want to also show one last video about, like you said, how to mobilize these people. What Gulen has said in his time to make difference for these people. That, as I told you, when I was growing up, Gulen was talking about many years about nonviolence. He talked many years about, you know, be the fighter of the love, care about everybody. Do not, you know, raise your hand against anybody. Do not go to violence. But actually, as far as I know, the movement has never been tested in the history much. But now the movement is being tested, that they are facing and one of the worst oppression in the history. They are losing everything. And still, are they going to be able to stick to their, you know, character, or they're still going to snap and do something terrible, which a lot of people do in other part of the world? So I want to show about what Gulen was teaching recently, 2 years ago, during the Ramadan, to his own followers about what to do when you're oppressed and what's supposed to do. So give me a couple minutes and let me just share that video also with you quickly.
İnsanların böyle insan öldürmeye, cinayetlere, zulümlere, haksızlıklara, şiddetlere, hiddetlere kilitlendiği bir dönemde bu şiddet, bu hiddet ne ölçüde kırılabilirse ben onu şahsen insanlık adına çok önemli bir şey sayıyorum. Gerçek mümin rüzgarları muhalif estiği bir dönemde, her şeyi saçıp savurduğu bir dönemde, tsunamileri takip ettiği bir dönemde, tepenizden aşağıya hakaretlerin yağdığı bir dönemde, size mesela karıncaya basmamışsınız. Böyle olmanıza rağmen kalkar birisi size terörist der. Dövene elsiz, sövene dilsiz, derviş gök.
I'm sorry about the technical mistake there. It looks like I couldn't share my screen. So let me quickly go ahead and do that.
İnsanların böyle insan öldürmeye, cinayetlere, zulümlere, haksızlıklara, şiddetlere, hiddetlere kilitlendiği bir dönemde bu şiddet, bu hiddet ne ölçüde kırılabilirse ben onu şahsen insanlık adına çok önemli bir şey sayıyorum. Gerçek mümin rüzgarları muhalif estiği bir dönemde, her şeyi saçıp savurduğu bir dönemde, tsunamileri takip ettiği bir dönemde, tepenizden aşağıya hakaretlerin yağdığı bir dönemde, size mesela karıncaya basmamışsınız. Böyle olmanıza rağmen kalkar birisi size terörist der. Dövene elsiz, sövene dilsiz, derviş gönülsüz gerek diyor sizin büyük dervişiniz Yunus Emre. Terörist diyene dilsiz gerek. Size ayaklarının altına alıp ezene dilsiz gerek. Ve la testevil hasenetu ve lesseyye. İyilik ve kötülük denk değildir. Birbirine müsavi değildir. Diyor Kur'an-ı Kerim. Ve la testevil hasenetu ve lesseyye. İtfah billeti hiye ahsen. Biri sana saldırıda bulunduysa sen bir iyilikle sav onu diyor. Billeti yahzen. Ne olur sonra? Feyzellezi beyneke ve beynehu adavetun keennehu veliyyun hamim. Seninle onun arasında düşmanlık olan kimse birdenbire bakarsınız ki o senin veliyyü hamimin olmuş. Candan, yürekten sımsıcak dostun haline gelmiş. Bu karakterinizden taviz vermemeye bakacaksınız. Ve büyük ölçüde bu imtihanı arkadaşlarınızla kazandınız. Alın teriyle kazandığınız, ortaya koyduğunuz malınıza, mülkünüze el konduğunda, müesseselerinize el konduğunda, birer şakî, birer asi gibi muameleye maruz kaldığınızda değil birine yumruk vurmak, parmaklarınızı o esnada kıvırmadınız, bükmediniz. 5 şeyin korunması haktır. İnsan o mevzuda müdafaa etme hakkına sahiptir. Bazı hukukçular buna hürriyet ilave etmek suretiyle usulü sitte diyorlar. Fakat yönümüz çok hassas olduğundan dolayı bence bu türlü şeylerde varsın bir cana kıysınlar. Mukabelede bulunmamak lazım.
So this was the one of his sermons 2 years ago. So this was in the thick of all this oppression coming from the government, and a number of people were saying that actually Gulen is not really leading his people to really have a good reaction to the situation. He's being too passive about it, and he's coming up and in the Ramadan saying that they are really powerful words over there, because I was shocked myself when I heard it, that he's saying that self-defense is your right sometimes. In almost every law around the world, self-defense with violence is permitted. But he's asking people to sacrifice their right to self-defense because their life is in danger, their family, their children is in danger. He's telling them, do not use that, practice that self-defense and still stay non-violent. He said they will even kill one of us, but we are still gonna be non-violent. And it just was so powerful to me that I haven't heard any other leader recently saying that do not, even they kill you, do not respond, do not retaliate. And also in the beginning, he says that, I don't just make this up myself. He says, Quran says this. Quran says that when somebody attacks you, your enemy attacks you, treat them with kindness, and maybe that enemy will turn to your friend. They'll become your best friend in there. So he's, like you said, as a man of God, getting that inspiration from the Quran. So I want to hear your perspective as the person who devoted your life for nonviolence. What do you see from this message?
Well, when you hear him say that so clearly in the actual circumstances where the followers of Hizmet are having their property taken from them, their livelihood taken from them, their jobs, professions, and even their lives, and he's actually advocating non-resistance and non-violence, even to the last step. You are reminded, or I am reminded of the non-violent martyrs of the Christian tradition. I mean, the word martyr, like so many words, can be co-opted by violence, and you can be a martyr for a cause and still use violence. But the classic martyr is someone who does not retaliate, and we think of Bonhoeffer and Romero and other people who have given their lives for their faith. And so there are two things really to say from this. One is that there is a very powerful human perspective here, or should we say historical perspective, because if, according to the poem that he quoted, that we're handless to those who hit us with their hands, we're tongueless to those who insult us with their tongues, we are heartless, that is, we do not retaliate with our hearts to those who break our hearts. If you do that, then you automatically infect your enemy with the same principle. Because we started off talking about imitation. Now you can imitate in terms of rivalry, and you can imitate in terms of competition. So very quickly you become the enemy and the violent opponent of the other. But I can also imitate in terms of compassion and non-violence and non-retaliation. So that is the sense of what Jesus taught in the gospel. He says, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. It's not in order to overcome them. It's not in order to be smarter than them or to defy them further. It's in order to infect them in their very mimetic selves, in their imitative selves, which they cannot help. It's like a child. When a child sees you as a father or a mother being kind or helpful, they imitate that. That's what educating a child is. Or if they see you getting angry or being offensive, they imitate that as well. It's very hard for a child not to do that. We all have that child. So when your enemy sees you doing that, they are deeply impacted. They may not change in that moment. They may carry on, but for certain, absolute certain, that non-retaliation will rise up inside them and make them feel disgusted with themselves, with their own behavior, and they will know that the other way is the best way. And they may very well, as he says, become your friend. You force them to be your friends. It's not easy, and it's very painful and humiliating, and it's not the way of the world. But you actually do bring into their imitative structure as human beings the other way, and that is what Gulen is saying. He says, you need to infect the world with non-violence, and that will be the victory. The other thing is, because, well, you might say, that's fine, but if he kills you, if your enemy kills you, what good is that? It may be that the world may ultimately be a better place, but you're dead, and also painfully dead, possibly. And that brings you to the doctrine of resurrection. It brings you to the biblical belief in resurrection. There is no, this is my belief, there is no foundation for non-violence if there is no resurrection. You can learn to be restrained, and you can learn not to give offense and to try to de-escalate circumstances. Yes, all of that is good, but you cannot give up your life rationally. It's not a reasonable thing to do, to give up your life, unless God promises you in faith and in your heart that he will raise you up. And that is the biblical faith in resurrection, that we can be nonviolent because the transformative power of God will raise up the nonviolent ultimately. So it is ultimately a rational and a reasonable thing to do, even though it may seem very challenging. On the one hand, it's a transformative thing to do. It can turn your enemy into a friend. On the other hand, for you, life is not over. The project of your life as a human being, which you have singular duty to protect. No one else can care for your life except you. You are your life. You should look after it. You should care for it. If you're going to give it up, it has to be because you believe that it will be ultimately restored. It will be redeemed. It will be lifted up. And resurrection is not a doctrine of the afterlife. This is another thing. Resurrection is not a doctrine of the afterlife, of going to heaven. It's a doctrine of nonviolence. That's what it is. God's vindication of nonviolence. So that's my response to his. Gulen is teaching authentic scripture for me. When he's saying that stuff, it's hard. It's difficult to accept. But it's authentic Quran, it's authentic gospel, it's authentic Bible.
Gulen himself says multiple times that he cries every night because many people that he are now facing unacceptable, unbelievable, oppression and torture, and People are trying to escape the country, but they are getting drowned in the river, and thousands are going through this. And he had to witness this. He had to be in the middle of it, that it just crushes him, that he says multiple times.
Right.
But he's still sticking to the non-violence. I haven't heard a single time he said, go take revenge, go, go what you need.
Right.
He never says that. It also reminds me of another example from Prophet Muhammad's time, that there was a member of a pagan tribe in Mecca that he hated Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He hated he was bringing a new religion as a prophet. He wanted to go kill him. So he told his people, he said, I'm going to go kill that guy. I'm going to go find him and kill him. So while Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was sleeping near and taking a nap near a tree, he somehow snuck through the people and come right in front of him, and he raised his sword on top of him. And then he woke him up. He was so now powerful and so proud of himself. He did that, and he was going to kill this guy who was claiming to be a prophet, and the problem will be over. And he asked now, finally, as a proud person, as a boasting person, who's going to defend you now? Who's going to save you? And while just woke up, Muhammad, without hesitation, he said, Allah will save me, he said. He said, I have no doubt. Allah will save me. And during that whole interaction, the guy started shaking, and he dropped his sword to the ground. And he just went on his knees. They say that an angel came and shook him or something. We don't know. But he did that. And then Prophet Muhammad picked up on the sword, and he now standing in front of him. And he said, who's going to save you now? Who's going to do your savior now? And the guy was quite smart, and he said that there are two people right now, he said, good person and a bad person, he said, and I don't want you to be the bad person. So if you kill me, you're going to become a bad person, he said, forgive me. And Prophet forgave him, and actually they became good friends. He became a good Muslim afterwards. So just like you said, that infection, that Prophet Muhammad could kill him immediately, and nobody could say anything because he was doing self-defense over there. But he didn't do that. He raised up the sword, and he didn't kill the guy, and said, God is protecting me, but I'm still not killing you. I'm not retaliating the same way. And that made that infection to that guy and made that change. And I believe Gulen right now is doing the same way, infecting others, like you said. That good of the non-violence, I think that will make a big difference in the future coming down the road. When we are going to really need people for non-violence, I think Hizmet will have something. There will be a reputation to talk about here. So anyway, I know we've been talking quite much. I wanted to ask about your final verse. Anything you want to share with the people who are now listening to us around the world for this message of nonviolence? What would be your final verse for everybody out there?
Well, there's a saying, what is it? You can talk a good game, but you've got to play the game. You can talk well about something, but you've got to be that thing. And that's true of all of us. So I would ask everyone who's listening to this broadcast to pray for everyone else, that we can all be faithful to this, because it's not easy, and it's not even human in the old way of being human. It's not natural. But human beings are not natural creatures anyway. We're always doing something different, and changing our natures. So I ask everyone to pray for me, and pray for Fethullah Gulen, and pray for each other, that we can be faithful to this way, and then we can learn from it and grow in it.
Absolutely, you are so right that we need to keep knocking on the door of God that can help us in this process, because sometimes it is really unbearable. My hometown in Turkey, I heard that there was another member of the Gulen movement, and they were asking him, give us names. Anybody you know who was somehow remotely involved in this movement, give us names, and if you don't give us names, we're going to kill you. They actually tied him to a chair and threw him into the Black Sea. And Black Sea is my hometown. I grew up in the Black Sea, but they threw him in the sea with the rope. And they were waiting till the last moment. He was drowning. He was swallowing so much water. Then they pulled him back. And they asked him again, give us more names who was in this movement. And then that took for more than 6 hours. He was now begging to kill them, because he's ready to die, but right at the moment he's dying, they are saving him. and putting there again. All day long, they were doing this. That I don't know, even if I'm in that position, I don't know how much I can stick to my principles, that how much I can do that. And recently I heard another friend that she was taking care of 2 children who were orphans. And I asked, how did they become orphans? And she said, some people from the Turkish authorities, they shot the father and they burned the father. And they couldn't even know who that person was. That eventually a little piece of skin on his toe, they did a DNA test on it, and they found out there was the father of those children, and another family was taking care of those children there. And by doing that, she was risking her own life, because if the government knows she's taking care of the orphans, she will end up in jail. That is the level of oppression right now the members are facing, and it's just breaking our heart every day. And right now, there's not much we cannot do, rather than just raise awareness and just pray for them. So we are joining your prayers also, and Allah will bring an end to this oppression. And so far, I'm so proud of all these people. They stuck to the non-violence principle, that they did not respond even a single punch, like Gulen said, that they didn't even respond with a punch in there. Thank you so much again for this sharing lovely Ramadan evening with us. That I know there's a lot of people out there in different world that I saw. There's about close to 300 people who have been eventually watching this show so far. So hopefully it was beneficial for them. And it's always great to share our heart with you, that you're a good friend of ours. And we still have a lot more service to do together. So we're going to help one another. Say salam, say hi to Linda, that we are praying for her, also for her service during the coronavirus.
Thank you.
We hope to talk to you another time.
Salam.
Salam, and everybody, thank you so much for joining us for tonight. And we'll connect with you again with another Rise Talks. Have a wonderful night, and Allah be with you. Salam alaikum.